Uh, I'm not so interested in the personal psychology of it, or nor the social, political aspect of it. But what I am concerned is, what will that do to the rest of the world? What will that do to Russia? Uh, it's truly amazing, and other people dare not think certain things, let alone say it. And if you were to say it, people would say you are the craziest guy and stupid. And yet Donald Trump says it as a matter of factly, and nobody objects.
Yeah.
And being the president, he has the wherewithal to do a lot of things about it. And this is a brave new world that we are seeing. Um, by the way, personally, I agree with a lot of things that some of the things that Trump is doing. But what is the cost of it? The international institutions are being totally ignored, if not damaged, wiped out. The rules, the rule-based society, which America loves to say, the rule-based society has no more rules because America is breaking it and nobody dare to say a word about it. And so is it worth it to do what he says what he's doing, which may have a legitimacy to it in some ways?
I think that there are a few points to say about the so-called rule-based order that are probably worth saying. I did a study last year with a colleague on comparing how countries do or do not abide by the UN principles and whether they vote with or against the majorities in the General Assembly, whether they join UN treaties or don't join UN treaties, and so forth. And we call this an index of alignment with the UN Charter. The United States ranked last in the world over the last 20 years. Last.
Correct.
It was, the U.S. has not ratified a major UN treaty for decades. In fact, the mere fact that it is a UN treaty leads the Senate to reject it because there's a view that, well, if the rest of the world wants it, it must be against us. It's a kind of paranoia which predates Trump, but is very pervasive. We once had legislation to prevent discrimination against people with disabilities. The U.S. adopted this. It was one of the first or the first in the world. And then it went to the UN, and it became a UN treaty. When it became a UN treaty, the Senate refused to ratify it because it was a UN treaty. And so this is a absolutely pervasive, weird phenomenon. The United States votes least of all countries with the majority in the UN General Assembly. Part of that is that it votes with Israel against the whole world on issues of Palestinian rights. But it's more than that. The U.S. became the great champion against the developing country call for any kind of social justice. Every year, the UN votes a massive majority against the use of unilateral sanctions. You know, under international law, no one country is allowed to put on economic sanctions against other countries. Sanctions are reserved as a right for the UN, not for an individual country. But which country uses sanctions every day is the United States by presidential decree, not even by congressional action. So in this sense, the U.S. has, in my opinion, not been a leader of a rules-based order. The U.S. has been a leader of a U.S.-based order. It had some disadvantages, but the phrase rules-based order was never defined. Whose rules? Not the rules of the UN, certainly, not by any objective measure. This is not something new. This is what I was saying has been true for 30 years. Trump says publicly what is hypocritical privately. So Trump is stunning in saying, I don't care about rules. I don't care about treaties. I don't believe in any of this. But the U.S. behavior has been quietly to neglect all of this while professing to lead a rules-based order. So Trump is just making explicit what has been implicit for a long time. He's much worse, in my view, because who walks out of the World Health Organization or who walks out of the Paris Climate Agreement? It takes a lot of nerve, in my view, to do that. It's repudiating the world interest in the most explicit way. So our earlier governments didn't do that, but they also did not do anything positive to assist. When it came to the Paris Agreement, for example, the United States has expanded tremendously its supply of fossil fuels since 2015. We have never had legislation in the United States on climate change. Never. Congress will not vote climate action because of the corruption that I talked about before, because big oil is more powerful than renewable energy in the American political scene. So all of this is to say that I abhor the way that Trump behaves, but it's not so different in many ways from long-standing behavior. When it comes to Ukraine, that's a whole nother matter which we won't discuss at length, except I'll just repeat, I believe that the U.S. was the provocation. Ronnie said and explained, Russia didn't want NATO on its border any more than the United States wanted the Soviet Union in Cuba in 1962. And
Condoleezza Rice has been saying it all along that NATO must expand to the east.
exactly. And this was a very direct provocation. Look at how, by the way, if we want to talk about hypocrisy, the United States has military bases, of course, all over this region, and yet Hutchinson can't have a port in Panama. Okay, that's the double standard that gets us into a ridiculous amount of trouble, because under the U.S. mindset, the Western Hemisphere is ours, up to and including Greenland and Canada, by the way. But all the rest of the world has been America's playground to do as it sees fit. The Middle East, anywhere. NATO enlargement, anywhere until Trump at least saying no on that. But in East Asia, still, of course, anywhere. My own view, by the way, quite strongly, is the United States should stop unilaterally any armaments to Taiwan, period. And I say to do that for the safety of Taiwan. There's nothing more dangerous for Taiwan than sending Taiwan armaments, in my view. This is the same as happened with Ukraine. If you wanted to be friends with Ukraine, keep NATO away. And there's a famous adage which people know, which I and others repeat almost daily, Henry Kissinger's adage that to be an enemy of the United States is dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal. And Taiwan should be very careful. They're not careful. But this is the kind of thing where the double standard. Imagine if China were arming the Upper West Side of New York because we're against Trump. It would not go down well. And I think we should be very cognizant of this risk.